Okay, last part of this series. So, the suburbanization of the martial arts, from strip malls to this whole kind of kinder and gentler understanding, fighting for social dominance as opposed to how you're going to get home that night. Very big difference, okay? Um, so, once martial arts were de- compartmentalized, um, sport aspects were put into place, and people were exposed to so much more stuff coming. Quality control, it kind of suffered. Now, I want to back up here and say I do have some respect for the Gracies and a lot of the other groups that they do have a good mechanism for when people are fraudulent and calling them out. And that's a good thing. Um, that's a good thing. That's a good development. Not everything was bad. And in my day, the way that you proved yourself was, who walked away, who got beat up more or who was able to show skill in that situation. So, you know, that was good for some stuff, but in terms of trying to find a teacher who was quality, I mean, it was a much rougher process, and there was no little book to tell you. So a lot of the guys from my generation, you should listen to. We know what we're talking about. Um, and let's talk about a few misconceptions that way, because that ties into how people are misled about karate and other arts, okay? The only arts that we have a actual a documented knowledge that they were used and how they were used and when they were successful on the battlefields are the arts that people tend to ridicule the most. The Japanese Kyoryu arts. They look very silly to some people who lack understanding. Now, there's levels to the game. It's true. When you're studying a Kyoryu, you're not going to necessarily train the same way. But you shouldn't be studying a Kyoryu for your first martial art. You should know how to fight before you study something like that. And it should be levels to the game. You should be able to appreciate some of the things that are used that way. They teach you how to integrate weapons. They teach you how to understand distance, timing, and intent on a whole nother level. So you grow as a martial artist, okay? Um, but people have always, they try to define, what people tend to do is they create a hermeneutic that suits their way. So real combat for them is what they do, okay? So they tell you things like going to the ground in a situation is real combat, okay? Ditto for weapons. You talk to a lot of Brazilian jiu-jitsu instructors, MMA teachers, and you talk about what if somebody has a knife, they say, oh, you can't mess with that. Run, okay? And then they say nobody can defend against a knife, and that's where the error comes in, okay? Bullshit. Yes, there's a probability you could get killed very easily against a knife. You could get really seriously injured. It's very dangerous. It doesn't mean you can't defend against it, okay? So, again, people take the narrative and they create their own hermeneutic and say, this is what self defense is. Just like when people tend to practice technique. A lot of times when I'm showing things, when I've done seminars or, classes, one of the first things I do is I'll give somebody a knife, for example, maybe a practice knife, although, let's just say practice knife for now. And I'll say, attack me with a knife. And they'll say, how? I say, how, any way you want, okay? The reason for that is when people are showing you self defense, they're often making the technique suit what they're showing you so that technique looks clean. This creates a mindset and a fallacy. When you're practicing technique, you should clean it up, and there is a time for that. But what you see with a lot of people when they demo stuff is they don't move their whole body, or they're moving in a one range, and you can't do that against a weapon, okay? And furthermore, You can't practice that way. So this gets into some other points about karate, which I'm going to address in this final part. But it's also something to remember when people are trying to impress you with their skills, okay? Any martial art that is used in an evolving combat situation, whether you're going to use it in wartime, whether you're going to use it bouncing, whether you're going to use it in a battle, whatever, you always have to take and modify it for your purposes. They say things like, they talk about these British bouncers who are incredible fighters, and somebody says, well, what did they study? Shotokan. It doesn't matter what they studied, okay? It matters in that they can use that to its particular um, attributes, but you take what you've learned and modify it to your circumstances, okay? I'm not crazy about Wing Chun, but I've seen somebody like Francis Fong on YouTube. He's incredible, very, very skilled. He's not just doing Wing Chun. He has developed an approach. And if he has to be able to do something with that art, he can modify it for that purpose. That's part of being a martial artist, okay? Bruce Lee taught us that, okay? If you look at Bruce Lee, what he was really trying to say, a lot of people think that he was just critical of these other arts. No, he wasn't critical of arts. What he was critical of was people using them in a way that didn't make any sense, okay? As my mother used to say, when you said, well, I did it because he told me to, she'd say, if he told you to cut your head off, would you cut your head off? So he was reacting to this thing where these traditional teachers would have people do very silly things, like you see these fake Chinese martial artists do, and then tell people to get into a ring, things of that nature. You have to have common sense and modify and creativity. It's an art, okay? It's not simply a repetitive practice. A lot of it is for different reasons. But when you have to use it, you have to take it and make it your own. Karate was very much used that way in my generation. You had clubs, like, for example, you had Korean stylists, okay? Muda Kwan. And they happened to specialize in a lot of fast linear punching techniques, okay? We had Shotokan guys who were very good at sweeps, okay? Throwing people around and things of that nature. When you fought against their guys, they were very good at that stuff, okay? Everybody had things that they did based on their teachers and how they developed their own approach with their art, okay? So I'm just going to quickly summarize. Karate is an art that is explosive. They've tried to recreate some of that and some of the offshoots, and they've done a good job. And there were always guys who did keep to the golden path. A lot of Masayoma's guys. John Bloom, Dutch martial artist, incredible fighter. But once you took those elements out of it and you tried to protect people, and you tried to combine it so they could use it more ubiquitously under different competitive situations, you destroyed the art, okay? It can be argued even that Funakashi, when he created Shotokan, he may have sort of, modified a lot of Okinawan ideals. But again, Shotokan, you can practice Shotokan as karate. You can, okay? And it has certain principles in it that are very good. One strike, one kill, generating power, things of that nature, things which are fundamental to using an art properly. Anyway, it's been a great discussion, guys, and hopefully we'll do more of this. I'll put some buzzwords out so maybe more people can come in and join this, since this is a little bit more of a general topic as opposed to most of the stuff that I put on, which I know is a little bit, it's for a select audience. We'll